Hola a todos, bienvenidos a este taller sobre active learning. Thank you, Julie, for teaching us more about online learning. We're eager to learn. As um, as for now, all businesses in Guatemala are locked down. The entire country is locked down, so we're all doing our classes online. We're really happy to be learning about online learning with you, and we can start right now. Thanks everyone for joining.
Hi, everybody. It's so good to see you all on Zoom today, or at least see your names and see you in the chat box. Who knew that we would be in this circumstance today, trying to figure out how to move instruction online, but we're all in this together. So here at South Alabama, we made the decision last week to have a break in classes this week, and then all of our instruction will move online starting Monday. So we've been busy getting everybody up and running this week, learning how to use new tools and learning a lot about online education. So I brought in my colleague, Dr. David Williams, from here at the Innovation in Learning Center at the University of South Alabama. I'll let him tell you a little bit about his background and what he does here.
Hello, everyone. I'm David Williams. Thanks to Julie for inviting me to come in to speak with you all and help you. We are certainly in this together. I am the Assistant Director of our Teaching and Learning Center here called the Innovation and Learning Center, specifically over course development. I have a background in public administration and instructional design, and have been teaching online in some capacity over the last 8 years or so. What we do here at the Innovation and Learning Center, ILC for short, is support our faculty regardless of the modality that they teach. And in my world here, I work a lot with our faculty that teach blended and online courses. So we have mobilized our resources to help everyone who is making this sudden transition in ways to remote instruction in ways that are going to be beneficial for us and for our students. So again, I'm very happy and excited to be here with you all today.
So you can see that we're still in our offices at the university, but this may be the last day that we're here. The students are gone, but staff and administrators are coming onto campus some, but we are keeping our social distance. So we are not Zooming from the same room. David is in the office next door, and we are Zooming in remotely from next door to each other. So I hope that you all are doing the same things. We do want to recognize the challenge of this situation because it's very different from planning an online course that you're going to start teaching next semester. So moving to remote instruction in an emergency situation is different from planning online courses. So we want that to be an undercurrent of the things that we say. We want to focus on high quality online instruction and how to do the best for your students, but we also just really have to understand that these are unusual times for us and for our students. And I had this really hit home with me on Sunday. We have excellent internet connection at home. We have high speed wireless internet and everything is usually good, but I was at home trying to do some work and I was getting that little spinny wheel going on. The internet was just lagging and taking a minute, and I thought, I'm glad I'm not doing a synchronous session right now with my students because I would be a step behind them. So we just have to recognize that it's new and challenging for everybody, and our students are jumping into it as well. So we want to keep kindness and consideration and flexibility in our minds as we make these plans. So as we get into, we're going to share some slides with you and walk through some principles of online instruction that we hope you'll find to be very helpful as you make this transition. We are recording the session today, so if you need to go back and look at it later, it will be there. I can send the slide deck to Carmen to send to you all. And then I just posted in the chat box a couple of resources that we have found to be very helpful during this transition. There are a lot of things going out there, some really good discussions and resources, but here are a couple that we'll refer to that have helped us a lot in this process. Now, we will ask everybody to stay on mute for now and post any questions you have there in the chat box. We're going to focus more on pedagogy with online instruction and less on the specific tools. So I know the team at Formación Continua is working hard to get you up to speed on Zoom and MeU and getting all those technology tools in place. We'll refer to those a little bit, but we're not going to get deep into the technology during this session. So with that said, we're going to jump into talking a little bit more about taking active learning online, and I'll share my screen with you. We'll move into looking at some different slides. All right. Let's see, I'm getting a little bit of an error message here. Hold on just a moment. Okay, so hopefully you all are seeing my slide at this point. Some of our goals for today are identifying first steps for beginning remote instruction and helping students develop a sense of community within your course. We also want to help you plan some active learning opportunities in your course as well. So let's start at the beginning with some of those first steps that you'll take as you begin remote instruction. One tool that we use with online education in general is Quality Matters. So David, tell us a little bit about Quality Matters and how we can use this as we shift to remote instruction.
Absolutely. So Quality Matters is a set of standards. There are 8 major criteria or standards that we use in the development and the review of an online course. The good thing to point out from this is that it's faculty-centered and peer-reviewed. So it is not a framework that is evaluative of you or your content or your level of expertise of how you're teaching the course. It really is how we design and facilitate a course. Here at the University of South Alabama, we are a QM institution, so we will often use the tools in helping faculty think through the elements of how they're facilitating an online learning experience. So Julie and I thought it was a helpful jumping off point because as we are, as I mentioned earlier, as we're transitioning during this emergency time, no one expects you or frankly any of our classes here to be fully fleshed out under all 8 and all 8 criteria and all of the substandards. So there is, please let me make sure that I'm 100% clear that it is not necessarily what our goal is in this emergency time to get all the way through and be checked off on all of the QM standards. Rather, and as Julie referenced the document that is in the chat box, Quality Matters and the standards that they put forth for how to have a well-designed course can serve as a nice checklist. And so what you'll see in the first, for example, the first criterion of a Quality Matters review is the first part of a course when students are logging on, however you're delivering it. Is it clear in the communication of how they're supposed to access the material? So anyways, we think that QM is a helpful organizing tool. We have been recommending its use here, and I think it might be a really helpful way for you all if you're wondering, how do I get started and what are my first steps? And so as she has on the screen here, the 3 phases of this checklist, and I would encourage you to click the document open, download it to your computer, and can kind of think through how you're going to implement those steps. But the first one is start here, like a communication plan, and we'll get to the next steps and longer term considerations. But again, I want to emphasize that Quality Matters is a set of design standards, again, to help us think about you organizing your course and how the students are going to experience that while maintaining a focus on the learning outcomes and alignment of everything that they're going to do.
Yeah, so let's take a look at those first steps in that phase of start here. What do we do right now? So we're going online now. What do we do? And one of the very first steps that we all need to take is to communicate with our students. We want to set clear expectations and deadlines. So be sure we're answering the questions: who, what, when, who's going to get together? How are you going to do this? What assignments do you need to do? When are they due? And then if you're using new tools, we've got to build in some time to orient students to these new systems and tools. So where do they go to find information? How do they access these tools? How do they use these tools? And we really want to keep at the heart of our instruction, what are the desired student learning outcomes for the rest of this course? So think about that for a minute. What are your student learning outcomes for the course? And then from there, we want to build assessments and determine learning activities with effective teaching practices in mind to support those learning outcomes.
And I'll add here, Julie, that it feels very much like the first day of the semester. And I'll make that statement with one caveat. So it in many ways, it does feel like week one, but you've got several weeks of instruction on the content already under your belt. So we're not dismissing what's been done. It feels like day one in the sense of we've got to orient them to the new way that they're going to be taking your class. So just like on your first day or your first week, where you're orienting them to you, your syllabus, those expectations, think through that lens, but not just about, or not necessarily about your content, but about how, again, now, mid-course, how they're going to experience, just like you would explain it and expect them to do it in a week one or a day one situation.
Exactly. So here's an example. When we first found out last week that we were moving to online instruction, I used our learning management system. You could use you, or email. One nice thing about doing it from the learning management system is to keep a record of all of those announcements so students can go back and see all of the announcements that you posted in one place without needing to go back and forth through email. But I sent them a quick email as soon as I knew what was going on. I sent them an email saying, by now you've probably heard the news that on-campus classes are canceled for next week and we will
Have a
move
coffee with you.
instruction. Fortunately,
I'll have mine. Pero es un Christopher.
let's see. Everybody could mute your microphones. Let's try to do that. That might be helpful. Okay, there we go. So I sent them a quick communication so that they know exactly what I'm expecting of them. So no class this week, but keep reading this chapter of your textbook, prepare for your next readiness assurance test. And then I assure them I will be communicating with you regularly with updates and specific plans for continuing our course remotely. Also, letting them know to reach out to me with any questions or concerns. I even gave them my cell phone number because I want them to feel like they can get in touch with me if they have any concerns or needs as we make this transition. So early, frequent, and redundant communication are very important in this kind of circumstance. So David, tell us a little bit more about what we can do within our course information to help our students along.
So I want to link this right back to Quality Matters Standard 1, an essential component. And again, I think you might begin to see how Quality Matters applies beyond online, because if you've been teaching face-to-face, one of the things you always want to do is explain how to begin in the course. I'll piggyback on what Julie just said. In online design, it feels it may feel uncomfortable or annoying. I'll just be honest. It may feel a little annoying that you're having to repeat yourself 2 or 3 times. But what we know from the field is that a little bit of redundancy is very helpful to the student. So you may have a syllabus that you've posted. You may have an email like Julie just showed. But this is a screenshot of a sample course space. This is not even what we use at South Alabama. So it's very important to know that this transcends the specific technology. But however you're delivering materials, you want some sort of prominent start here, click here, read this, do this. That'll be some distilled version of the announcement that you may have sent out, some distilled version of the syllabus that shows these are the things that are changing for the next several weeks. The example that we often give here is the following. When students walk into a classroom with rows, chairs, tables, facing a board, a lectern, a screen, a podium, you don't have to tell them, hey, go sit here and face forward. They know that that's how they enter a class to be prepared, right? In an online environment, this is that equivalent. When they're clicking by walking in, where do they sit? Where do they point their attention? And this is what's helpful. We already know that online learners can feel disconnected and isolated. We know that from a decade's worth of research. You might imagine that through this time, isolation and disconnectedness, because it's being thrown on us very immediately because of the viral prep or the virus prep. So we want to overcome that in our lane in connecting some of these standards and some easy things that you can do. So a link to the syllabus, a very prominent start here, a very clean, clear way that may feel redundant, but right now, let's build some redundancy in. Over communicate is the name of the game, because all of a sudden they're not coming to see you physically in person.
Absolutely. And as you put together your course materials for the remainder of the semester, another thing to think about is just how you organize those materials. So one of the principles is consistent design architecture. So David, walk us through a little bit about how we would set up our course in an effective, consistent way.
You see here on the screen, we've called modules. That is a synonym for a weekly lesson, a unit, a module, some content chunking that you're doing, right? So think in terms of where you are in your course, what are the next things that you're teaching, okay? And so here we're using module, but I don't want you to get hung up on that name. It could be, again, lesson, weekly unit, whatever it may be. The name of the game here is be consistent with how you're laying out your lessons. So I would recommend starting off with what are the learning objectives? What specifically in these lessons do you want them to be able to know, to be able to do? And just spell that out, and it can be very clear, and that can feed into what the to-do list is for that week, that lesson, that module. Read this chapter, watch this video, participate in this forum, attend this Zoom session. And then from that, lay out the content. Is it a Zoom session they're attending? Is it a video that they're watching? What is the content delivery? What is replacing your active lecturing or your active content delivery? For those of you that might be teaching in team-based learning formats, what are the ways that you're encouraging the individual and the teams and the application activities, right? So the content part. And then I would recommend ending once again with a to-do list. So they begin the unit and they end the unit seeing this is what the expectations were for me. And I think checklists are a good idea anyways, just as an organizational tool. And a checklist that is really clear for what the students are supposed to achieve, even if it's something simple like read this chapter because a test is coming 2 weeks from now. Don't underestimate the value of stating out simple things. Again, I know it may feel frustrating, annoying, and redundant, but it's going to help you avoid those. Excuse me, Dr. Estes, I know that you said this in the class, but what am I supposed to do again? That's what's coming, and we want to avoid that. And frankly, avoiding that and presenting good, consistent design achieves so many good learning principles for us.
Yes. So to summarize that a little bit, consistent design includes really well organized materials. So put them in an organized format. Whatever you're using to get the materials to your students, follow a consistent format with that. Be very clear about how they get started with start here as your file name or your big title on the top of the page that lets them know exactly where to get started and what they should do next. Think about how you organize your content into modules or lessons or weeks, and keep that consistent from week to week. Also, as David mentioned, checklists can be really helpful. One thing to think about with this is a rhythm of your course. You know, if you're used to coming in and meeting with them face to face every Tuesday and every Thursday, that has a certain rhythm to it. Think about developing that kind of rhythm for your online course too. Maybe you send them a communication every Monday with their expectations and deadlines for that upcoming week. Or maybe you meet with them one particular day of the week or offer some office hours. Just think about how you can help the students feel comfortable in this new environment by consistently designing your materials and developing rhythms within the course. This is always important for online instruction, but it is especially important during this emergency preparation. As nervous as we are about moving our instruction remotely to an online format, our students are probably nervous about it too. So the more structures and redundancy and information and clarity we can provide, the better our students will feel about this new approach. So we have some decisions to make about how we're going to set up the course. And one of the key decisions is deciding what modality we want to use. So do we want to use an asynchronous learning environment that offers maximum flexibility for the students? Or do we want to have some synchronous sessions just like we're doing right now? And then alternatively, a third choice is to integrate or combine synchronous and asynchronous. So David, will you walk us through the components and definitions of these different modalities?
The rhythm of the class is so important. So we will look at this through the lens of asynchronous. An asynchronous learning environment using asynchronous tools on the left side of your screen means that you're not requiring students to meet in a live session. So they can access materials, whether it's a forum, a discussion board where you give a prompt and students are answering that question and responding to others on their own time, or they're using social networking tools. Again, the key element is on their own time within your specified time frame, but not at a specific set date and time. So the benefit of this, particularly as we're moving through the next several weeks, is that it does allow a lot more flexibility in students accessing your materials when they can, when it's convenient. We are being forced into staying home and working remotely, and students with children and families and other responsibilities, when you start looking at the benefits of why some of these tools might be used, filtered through the lens of the other responsibilities that our students may have, you can see why those benefits are really important. Conversely, synchronous, just like Julie said, is what we're doing. So we are in sync with one another. We are meeting live here. I can see your faces. You can hear me at the same time. We're chatting in real time. We are talking in real time. And as you might imagine, the benefit that we see from this is you don't have to wonder what my tone was. You can watch my body language and hear me and see me. It's a lot more personal, right? It makes the online environment seem more tangible and connected. I mentioned the decade of research that we know about online. It's a little more than a decade, but specifically within the last 10 years, the element of adding synchronous tools, Zoom or any other web conferencing tool, group chats like WhatsApp and other type of applications that are used on devices, podcasts where people are meeting in real time and discussing and talking through audio means. These are being used in increasing numbers because we can see and hear and feel each other through the means of the web. Julie and I recommend leveraging the power of both because I think there are times when it makes sense to bring students together in a live meeting. I see a question about, do we recommend video conferencing forcing students to turn the camera on? My recommendation is to start a meeting with webcams on, and then if you see that the bandwidth or the connectivity is struggling, one of the things you can do to save bandwidth is have everybody turn their webcams off. So that's a hard across the board recommendation, but as a general rule, webcams on, microphones muted is the best way so that we can see and then give each other the ability to respond. And you'll have to play it by ear. We have some classes here that will have over 100 students potentially coming to a Zoom session, and we have some classes where it will be 5. And you might imagine the considerations there that are different. But I think that the one big suggestion that I can make if you use a web conferencing solution is to record just like we're doing right now, so that if anyone can't physically attend, and I submit to you that we're going to have lots of students with legitimate reasons is why they can't attend, but if you have the recording viewable, then they can go back and watch the video, and we suggest that you have them do something with that video. Respond to a question, answer a reflection assignment. Don't let it just be a passive viewing learning activity. Turn the watching of a video into an active learning situation, which we'll talk about just a minute. I'm getting a little ahead of ourselves. But I think accountability is the other thing we have to think about when we're looking at synchronous and asynchronous.
Yes, so this is one of the first things for you to think about right now is, are you going to schedule some synchronous sessions with your students, get everybody together on Zoom, or are you going to go with more asynchronous content? And like David said, we really like a mix of these, even just offering some office hours where you are on Zoom and your students can come in to visit with you a certain day and time of the week if they have questions or need more follow-up or connection. That can be an effective strategy to use as well.
Julie,
so
I'll also add something there, Julie, that I also am recommending right now to let the first session be a practice session. Let there be a really low risk attendance to that so that students can get familiar with how it looks on their device and what you're doing. I would not recommend jumping right into some deep content, because then you're fighting through the anxiety of my camera's not working, my microphone's not working. So let it be an orientation just like you would on week 1.
Absolutely. Great suggestion there. Let's take a couple of questions. So Karen said, what would be the procedure for those students that are not attending Zoom sessions?
So I would answer that in this way. So if in your communication plan, once you've made some decisions about you're going to have a meeting every week at this particular time or whatnot, first of all, let the students know, be very clear and give them as much time as possible. I know that that's a very difficult task right now, but as much time as possible to let them know that they can expect a meeting on Wednesday mornings at 10 o'clock. As much as you can, try to stay consistent. But for those that can't attend, I would have the students watch the video and make sure that it's very clear how the videos are being posted, right? So I don't know exactly how that's going to look for you and your technology, but let that be very clear how students, so that's the number one thing, let them know where to access and how to access, and then give them a specific time limit that they have to go in and watch the video and respond to something that takes accountability to watching it, but take advantage of that. Let it be a quiz question, a reflection assignment, something that fosters higher order thinking, but that's got to be time limited too. You don't want to put yourself in a position where 3 or 4 weeks from now, have students still watching a video from week 1, you want to stay consistent with deadlines and timelines as much as possible. And I think building that sort of participation accountability into going forward is really going to be helpful.
Right, exactly. And some of the questions in the chat box are, well, if we record them, what motivates them to come to the live session? So perhaps the assignment that they have to do if they don't attend the live session is a little more detailed, a little more intense. They have to do some thinking, writing, reflecting on the recording to get that participation credit. Whereas if they come to the live session, their participation is included in the session. So that would be an incentive to come to the live session.
I have another live example. So I did a consult the other day with an exercise science instructor, and we addressed this exact issue. So in her live session, she's breaking the students out into groups, and they're getting to analyze certain questions, and they're getting the benefit of being with her and doing some of those interactive activities. And then for the students that can't be there, they're having to do a distilled version of that requires them to do a little more independent research and work. So the way that she's structuring the activities, you would want to be there if possible, because you get the benefit of doing, I don't want to say it's a more exciting or a cooler activity, but it would be a lot more fun. And so it's incentivizing but not punishing. And I think that's the fine line there.
Yes. And Carmen, would you like to weigh in a little bit on the recording? You mentioned in the chat that classes are being recorded but not necessarily shared with the students. Do you want to share some insight on that?
Yeah, for legal purposes, all the classes are going to be recorded. I think every department at UFM ended up deciding to record them just to have a record that we are giving the classes. But they're not necessarily going to be shared with the students. I don't know what that process would look like. The one thing I know is that all classes will start at the time that they're scheduled, and that's it.
Okay. All right, thank you for sharing that about your context there. So there's another question about privacy with asynchronous learning using Facebook groups or WhatsApp groups, but what are your experiences? So this could be a contextual difference. Here at South Alabama, we really encourage faculty to use the learning management systems that we have available and to go through those channels just for student privacy and engagement. Those are set up to meet all of the expectations. Of course, you can think about it in terms of a face-to-face course. The students see each other and know who they are and hear each other respond to questions, but they certainly don't see each other's grades or get that kind of information on the other students within the course. So that may be context dependent, and I'll let Carmen, if you want to add anything now or back in the chat box to respond to that, you can certainly do that.
Julie, there's Carmen. No. Julie, there's another question there about making sure, or what can we encourage the use of questions or questions to be asked, and I'll take a stab at answering. Okay. One thing I would recommend is have a place, regardless of whether or not you're using a synchronous session, have a place where students can post questions. So for us, we encourage the use of a discussion forum. We call it Muddy as Points or Q&A, where students are free to ask any question, and students answering each other often happens, which is kind of nice. And you can use that as an open forum. But to your point specifically about I think it really speaks to the larger about fostering activity and engagement in a live session where they feel free to ask questions and participate. I think that is really important to set as the expectations in the environment in your first session. Maybe think of ways that everyone can practice unmuting their microphone and just sharing what they're doing, how they're accessing the course. You can do it in small groups or even in a whole class, depending on how large your class may be. So number one, just setting everyone to be relaxed and unmuting their microphones and speaking, and to let everyone know that the ground rules are that is the expectation and there is that freedom. But also understanding that you'll never, ever completely get rid of the anxiety that students may feel there. So allowing them the chat box or to message you privately, allow all of those channels, but still encourage as a general rule that you want activity and engagement, even if that means some of those other channels. Conversely, what you don't want is the sleeping, the talking off camera, that's where you want to go to avoid. And so it's been my experience in teaching students on Zoom is that I'll accept a host of means of asking questions and being a part of the class. What I don't like is, again, sleeping, webcam off, talking on the phone. Clearly those behaviors that you wouldn't want in your physical classroom. And that's where I think we say, these are the acceptable and the not acceptable behaviors. So I agree with the statement there about the rules being established. It's just a regular class. Like, you want to think through what you want and what you don't want. And as long as they know and let them practice, I think you'll be good.
Yes, and one way to add to that is to have the students set the ground rules and have the students be involved in that discussion about, okay, so this is a new environment for us. We are meeting synchronously on Zoom and you all are here, so let's set up some ground rules and expectations. How do you think we should interact online? And often the students will set higher standards than we would actually give them. So that would be interesting to try that during that first class meeting, just to talk through the ground rules. This is how we are going to interact in this environment. So there's one more question here, and then we're going to move on in our topics, and then we'll have some open time for questions and answers at the end. But Nicholas asked, what if you want the students to give a presentation to the rest of the class? And that is certainly a capacity that you have with Zoom for other students or other people beyond the instructor to share their own screens and to talk and share in the class. In an asynchronous modality, you could have the students record presentations and upload them for sharing out to the course. So that certainly is a viable option. If you already had individual or group presentations built in your course, you can still have the students do those.
Julie, may I add one additional thing?
Absolutely.
I just happened to look down and see that we're up to 110 participants. So like this is a good example where we're modeling where we wanted you all, because Julie and I want interactivity and questions. So we paused and answered all of your questions, and that opened up this environment for additional questions, right? So it's an example of us, of that rhythm of this presentation. But then I was thinking about, okay, we could practice breakout rooms, or you could think about ways that you would encourage student presentations. And then I looked at, we're now at 111 participants. So if we were actually teaching this class right now, Julie and I would not actually say, in 111 students, let's move to student presentations, because the feasibility of that, right? So a lot of our decisions are filtered through how many students you have, the time expectations, and things like that. So I just wanted to say, even with where we are right now in this live session, is kind of modeling some of what we're talking about.
Yes, and we are going to be moving into sharing some active learning tips. And as Carmen mentioned there, you can allow them to share screens and even give them host permissions. You see it under participants. So you have some options there within Zoom. And as we move forward with thinking about this, it's important to apply some principles to our practice. And we want to quickly share a model with you that forms our online instruction, because it's a theoretical model and framework, but it has practical outputs, and purposes. And it's called the community of inquiry model. As we develop our online instruction, we want to think about incorporating these three big ideas of the community of inquiry model. And the first component is cognitive presence. So David, tell us a little bit about cognitive presence within an online
A lot of what
course.
we've been talking about to this point is getting us towards thinking about what are the types of learning activities that we want to accomplish. Remember, learning outcomes, what is it we want the students to be able to demonstrate that they know how to do and as achievement of those goals. So anytime that you're thinking they're going to make a presentation, the question we just had, right? How they're going to interact with material, how they're going to, knowing what your discipline and your content is, what are the ways by which you want them to know science, economics, whatever your discipline may be? What are those ways that they are coming to conclusions, interpreting content, making decisions? So being actively involved in building content and cognitive knowledge, right? Increasing the bounds of what they know through the structure of your learning activities and assessments as you're structuring them through. The second concentric circle of the community of inquiry model is the teaching presence. Also a lot of what we've been talking about, right? So are those time parameters, the third bullet down there, right? Synchronous sessions at this time, watching a video until 5 days after. So setting time phases, setting parameters, but for the ways in which the students will participate because of your involvement, the accountability standards that you've put into place. What is acceptable? You'll see establishing netiquette, which is the online phrase for online behavior, how we expect discourse and conversation and interaction to be. Your involvement, you setting the ground rules, your involvement holistically in the course. And the third and final part of the model is social presence. So back to Quality Matters. Quality Matters encourages student to student interaction, student to teacher interaction, and student to content interaction. And anytime we are facilitating solid interactions among those three, we're seeing a higher level of social presence, where you're having them respond to others in a forum, responding to others via email or other means by which you're having them to collaborate and to complete the course. So one of the things one of the reasons why I like this model is because it helps us with some easy guardrails to hold on to. That right now I would encourage you to sketch out the 3 circles on your paper and think, what's one thing I can do to facilitate a cognitive, a teaching, and a social presence? As you're thinking about how you're going to transition and move your class to a remote instructional format, what are the means by which? And then Julie's heard me say this 1,000 times, where the 3 circles come together is the sweet spot of our course. Do we always get there every single week and every single time? Unfortunately, no. But our goal is to always have these 3 presences in functionality through our actions and our design.
So take just a minute to think about that. Think about, and maybe jot it down, as David said, draw your circles, and think about how you might work on establishing that cognitive presence, the teaching presence, and the social presence within the course. And this is particularly important as we move to remote instruction quickly, maintaining not only the academic requirements of the course, but also transitioning that sense of community that we have within a course structure to the online environment.
And I'll also add, this is an evidence-based model from instructional design. It's been tested over the last 2 decades and found to facilitate and foster higher order thinking and high level of interactions. And again, one of the reasons why I like it is because it allows you to think, what's one thing I can do in each of those 3 circles And as we're all working together and adapting over the next several weeks, that's one of the questions I'm asking myself. What's one of the things that I can do in each of these three bubbles, so to speak, that helps get to a higher or a high quality environment for our students and for ourselves, right?
And to me, this is a great checkup. So in a week, in 2 weeks, I'm going to come back to these circles and say, okay, how am I doing with cognitive presence? Am I giving them opportunities to explore and to come to conclusions? What am I doing in terms of teaching and teaching presence? Am I utilizing this medium effectively? Are we having good netiquette behaviors? And then I'll check myself on social presence too. How am I doing with those ongoing interactions with the students in this different environment? And we'll make sure that these slides are available to you all. We'll make a PDF of them and get that out to Carmen so she can share them back out with you. So you can come back to this in a week or two and use it as a little bit of a checkup to see how you're doing. As we think about this interaction with the content, we have some different ideas to share here on this. And these are some easy go-to solutions that you might want to utilize. So think about adding in some short instructor created voiceover presentation. You don't want to go too long with the materials. It is different when we're in this online environment. You might find yourself wandering over to your email or other materials, or watching a show on Netflix while we're having our class. So think of breaking up your unit into short segments with time for interaction or response after those short segments. Also, take a look at available video materials that are out there. Khan Academy, TED Talks, YouTube. There are so many different types of instructional materials that are available, and you might find those to be particularly useful at this time. One example, I'm teaching neurobiological bases of human communication disorders, which just means all of the neuroanatomy and physiology related to speech, language, and swallowing. And so there are some really great animations on Khan Academy and on brainfacts.org that show structures and how they work. So I can embed those in some of my times with the students, either in synchronous sessions. I can take a moment to share one of those animations with them, or I can require that when we're not in our class meetings as an asynchronous component. Also, you can get them to do written overviews and reflections or summary documents and have them submit those as an assignment. So, David, other ideas for having students interact with the content?
One of the things that I'll suggest is that avoid the pressure on yourself to have to create every single thing, right? So it may be your preference not to use a lot of other open educational resources, but I would say give yourself a break a little bit and look and see what is in existence, and then put your spin on how you might want students to use it. I've seen that suggestion out of so many centers for teaching and learning, and a lot of the professional organizations that I belong to. That has been a really big recommendation: is let's share among what's out there, and not put the pressure on ourselves to have to create every single thing. Julie gave some really good suggestions here of some places that are available depending on your content. The other thing that I'll suggest to you as well is that when you're thinking about restructuring your content, what are some ways that you can use what's happening in the world and our reactions to the world in your content, right? If it's a communications class, the CNN and other news headlines are your textbook right now. Thinking of ways of what's happening through this process of how the content or the interaction with the content can be creatively presented. And I would encourage you to think through those ways as well.
Yeah, so that brings us to some active learning here. So there are some different ways that we can engage with active learning in our courses, even though we're moving them online. So a key idea here, those of you who've been to my sessions at UFM, you know that I always talk about this and start with this because it really is foundational. Keep your learning outcomes as your central focus. So what do your students need to be able to do as the result of this course? So just like you would in a face-to-face course, keep those student learning outcomes at the very center of everything you're doing. From there, develop active learning opportunities to support the meeting of those student learning outcomes. So as David mentioned, connect the content in your course to real life situations. Current situations are great to get students really engaged in talking. Also to their future work or their career, their profession. Think about how you might connect the content and the learning outcomes to real life situations. And that gives you great ideas for active learning. So they could analyze decisions that have been made in shutting borders related to the virus or the way healthcare systems have managed it. They could compare one region's process with another region's process and determine which one of those was best. So many different opportunities to bring them into the content in an active and meaningful way by connecting it to real life situations and to their professions. Also, think about application-based assignments, not just things that are memory or memorizing material and giving it back to you, but always think about how can I have them apply this fact in a new way or give them a case-based approach. So they're reading about a case and they're coming up with a solution based on the content of the course. Also, you can do lots of group work in an online environment. In a synchronous session, you can put the students in smaller sessions. Also, you can have them work asynchronously as groups using collaborative tools like Google Documents or Google Slides or Google Sheets. Those work really well for collaboration there. One other thing to think about that came up a little bit earlier is the idea of student-created content and those presentations. So let students create some of the content and share their ideas. David, do you want to add some more ideas here on ways to engage them in active learning?
The thing that I would also advocate here is just a transparency of your assignments, right? So it's really clear how it's connecting back. And if you've been in sessions with Julie at UFM, I am sure that she talked about the importance of transparency in the assignment. So as she's talking, I'm just thinking on the logistics of that, scheduling and being clear of back to the teaching presence, right? The actions that you take that are clear, maybe even a little redundant, again, with communication and expectations that facilitate the achievement of some of these, whether it's a presentation or a collaboration or a small project or whatever it may look like, beyond just a mere reading of a textbook, right? And that's kind of a baseline. Beyond just a passive recipient of material, we're engaging them actively beyond just a passive viewing or a passive reading. The degree to which your teaching presence is structured with deadlines and achievements and criteria for assessment, you'll see these types of examples and these types of activities really soar, I think.
Let's pause for just a moment here and see if there are any questions. Trying to keep up with the presentation and writing or viewing different content, especially on the same computer, is one of the biggest challenges for students. when you realize you notice what was missed in the last 5 minutes or so, ideas to help with this. That is a fantastic question. So how can we help students keep up with what they're doing and with what we're doing? And a quick answer to that would be it goes back to the beginning and really organizing those materials and providing those to your students ahead of time, along with clear instructions. So you might have a note-taking guide for the live session that students can download that note-taking guide and maybe print it out or have it open on another device. That's one solution that you could think about. Also giving them a slide deck ahead of time if you were going to be showing a lot of images, that they needed to make some notes on those images. And that's where the recording can come in handy too, so that if they do miss something and they need to go back and take a look at it later, they might have that opportunity. With Zoom, it also provides a transcript of the session, which is very helpful. The recording includes the video recording and a transcript. And so that kind of brings us to the topic of accessibility, making sure that what we're doing is accessible to our students. So David, would you speak to accessibility a little bit?
I'll be glad to. I'll also say, in reference to this specific question as well, that I think I'll speak for myself, although I've been in Zoom sessions where it's been true of other presenters, but I'll keep it to myself, or using myself as an example, that when you are the presenter and you're speaking on Zoom, our tendency is to go faster than maybe we normally would have, because everyone's starting from a muted microphone. And if you are teaching in a live classroom, you're able to more readily see body language or physical hands. On my screen right now, I see 10 or 12 of you, but that doesn't mean that I'm seeing all of you on my camera in one view. So I think we do have a tendency to go a little faster maybe through material. So I would encourage you to have regular pause breaks for questions, for reflection, for some sort of note taking, or even if it's just an individual thing. So I think building in some pauses, even if it's in your slide deck, pause here. I think that's a really good suggestion. On top of that, it's awkward. I'll admit that this is awkward, but you want to increase your pause waiting time when you're allowing students to unmute their microphones or even to respond in the chat box, because you want to give a little extra time in general, even if we were in the physical space, but also add a few seconds because of internet lags and all, even in this moment that I'm speaking to you, you're probably hearing it 5 to 10 seconds later than the time that I actually am saying it. So I want to give another 10 to 15 seconds, even though it may be awkward. For example, if I pause right now, are there any questions? I'm gonna pause and I'm gonna wait, and it's really awkward, but I'm telling you, it's the best suggestion to do that. So that's one way to answer that question additionally. So for accessibility, Julie mentioned recording your session in Zoom. When you record it to the cloud, it provides a transcript. So it'll take some time to process, then you'll get an email saying that, that the video is processed, and you'll get a link to the recording. And again, I'll defer back to Carmen on recordings, but that's a really helpful way to also think about accessibility, because it provides a written transcript. The other thing is, right now, Julie is modeling this as well. If anyone in this session needs accommodations for visual impairment, providing the slides before and or after, really before, is helpful so that students can use what other technologies they may need. If you have a visual impairment, the screen share of this PowerPoint slide is not going to be accessible. So think through some of that so that you want to have students access all of the materials in ways that are reasonable. The other things that you want to think about if you're not doing a Zoom session and you're just loading materials in, Use documents that have clear headings, or links to transcripts if you're using a YouTube video or other videos. Think through if you have students that have accommodations. The big thing you want to make sure is that the documents are readable by screen readers, that there is alternate ways to view the media, whether that's an alt text on an image or if they can download a document. So the number one mistake that happens here is that we scan images from our phones or a copier, and it's a copier of an image. It's a copy of an image, not a black and white textual electronic document. So that's the number one suggestion regarding accessibility, for accessibility.
So before we move on to assessments and feedback and technology, we do have a couple of other questions. Axel asked, can you privately answer questions for individual assistants during a session other than chat? So chat is going to be the best way to privately answer answer questions within a session. Certainly outside of the synchronous class time, you could have one-on-one meetings. So you could offer office hours or appointments for students who needed further clarification. But within the primary session, the host will need to be in the main session, so you won't be able to have a video conversation with one person while the main session is going on. That said, you can always use the chat feature, and you can set up appointments at another time outside of the session. So another question was, Anna asked, usually I ask questions during class to create these kinds of pauses that we were talking about. How does this work with multiple microphones and multiple chat responses? So a couple of things going on there. Again, it's all about setting the ground rules for your course. Knowing how many students are in the session makes a big difference here. And just setting up the expectations. And you can say, okay, I'm going to be asking you questions just like I would in our typical class environment. And if you would like to respond, you can raise your hand. So in Zoom, there's a raise your hand feature that the students could use, or you could have them unmute their mic and raise their hand physically on the video camera and be ready to speak. And I'd also let them know, I'm going to call on you from time to time too, just like I would in class. And you can use some cold calling to keep the conversation going by asking students, what do you think about that? Or what do you have to add? So Edwin raised his hand there, and I can see that pop up on my screen. And it's a great feature to see when your students have questions or when they're ready to speak. So there is that raise the hand option. So another question is, when can you access the transcript from the video? So the way that works is it takes a few hours of processing after the session ends for that transcript to become available. And then Karen also added, you could write the name of the person you'd like to respond to the question on your screen. Absolutely. You can also use that chat box to communicate with the students, be ready, I'm going to be asking you some questions. So you could write their name in the chat box or say it out loud or write it on the screen. The main thing here is to set up the expectations from the beginning and develop that feeling within the course of how and when we respond to questions. And that really will depend a lot on the number of students in your course. And just practice that at the beginning. Just get started. And as David said, longer pauses are needed to hear from them. Okay, let's take a look at how we are going to assess students and give them feedback in this new environment. So we want to explicitly link our activities with our course objectives. So what are your learning outcomes for your students? What are you trying to accomplish? What activities are you doing to accomplish those outcomes? And then think about how you will know if the students have met that outcome. it's going to be really important that you describe how and when you will evaluate the work that the students submit. For example, if you give them a participation grade in your face-to-face course, be very clear with them up front how that changes now that you're online. How and when are you going to evaluate their participation? Then if you give them written assignments that they turn in, or we talked about them doing a presentation or a video overview, be sure you're clear about how and when you are going to evaluate the work that they submit. And then you also want to provide feedback on their progress throughout the course. So in a face-to-face environment, they're getting a lot of praise and encouragement and feedback from us along the way. And we want to replicate that in the online environment as much as possible. So if we have them participate in a written threaded discussion, we need to be in that discussion, giving them feedback, asking questions back and forth, offering suggestions. And sometimes that might be group feedback on a set of reflections. For example, in one class, I gave students an assignment to summarize a key idea. And it was not a highly graded activity. It was just an opportunity for reflection and interaction. But I wanted to give them some feedback on that. So I took a look at all of those, and in the next class, I said, here were the most common error patterns that I saw as you summarized this concept we talked about in class. You can go back and revise your statement now with this feedback. And so then the students went back and they revised their statement based on my feedback. So this doesn't always have to be an individual graded assignment. You can give them feedback about their progress in other ways as well. So David, talk to us a little bit more about what you've observed with assessments and feedback.
Yeah, I think that's a really important part there about you can do whole class communication that is helpful. I will talk a little bit about tools here, for example. So if you are wanting to, if your learning outcome is for them to explain or analyze or do some deeper level analysis of the content, and then you're going to use maybe an online quizzing tool, then you want to think through, just like you would have in your face-to-face course, questions and activities that will reach those learning outcomes, right? So I think when we're talking about online design and shifting to remote instruction, in as much as anything, it's the right tools for the right learning outcomes as well. If you have a learning outcome that is about group work or group interaction or facilitation of collaboration, that sort of thing, and then you don't use a tool that helps facilitate that, then your assessments are not going to be aligned, right? So as you're shifting to how students are going to actually fulfill the remainder of your course and beyond, then these are principles that are regardless of modality. I would be telling you in your face-to-face class that your tools and your interactions and your assessments need to be aligned to that learning outcome, and even much more now as we're shifting. Quality matters, back to that hook. The bedrock of quality matters is a measurable learning outcome that's aligned to the activity, to the correct tool, providing the appropriate level of assessment and assessment feedback. That is the bedrock of our design. So I think that is why outcomes, tools, assessments are so important.
Yeah, so we really want to make sure we're lining those up throughout our instruction and being clear with the students about the learning outcomes, the activities that they'll do related to those outcomes, and then how we'll give them feedback on their performance and evaluate those outcomes. So we do have some technology decisions to make, and you want to consider your technology requirements, those of the students, as you make these decisions, balance expectations with feasibility. And I think we're all going to learn some lessons about this as we transition. It's a transition, it's change. And so we can predict some bumps along the way, but we need to be ready to balance what we expect of our students with what they're able to do. So you might want to ask your students about how they'll be joining the meetings. Will it be from their phone or from a computer? We want to encourage them in most cases to join from a computer if possible, just so they get a bigger view of the screen and we're able to share our screens with them and engage with them in a different way. So ask about those requirements, encourage the use of webcams, as we talked earlier, camera on, microphone muted when you start out the meeting, and then unmute that microphone to talk, and then provide opportunities for practice. So we had a question in the chat box about that. How long do you take to introduce the students to the new methodologies? And I think the short answer is as long as they need. Sometimes this can be done very quickly. As you've seen, jumping into these new technologies, Zoom is quite easy to click a button and you're in the meeting and can use it effectively. However, using test and quizzes features in a learning management system or helping them navigate through course materials, it may take a little bit more time to orient them to those processes. If you are having them create materials and upload those, you'll want to walk them through those processes. And as you think about your technology decisions, think about how you will take some time to orient the students to those tools and spend a little time practicing together. David, anything to add on that?
I think you could embed the practice, the orientation. I also agree. I think it's hard to say 1 week or 1 day or 3 days. I think I would embed it. If you're going to use Zoom, then in your Zoom meeting where you're practicing unmuting microphones, maybe embed that to a question such as, the world is shifting to remote. What does this say about where our culture is, our technology is? Like, think of a question that relates to your content back to that suggestion, and you're embedding the orientation to the technology to something that doesn't feel like a practice, although what you know is it's a practice. And then you can gauge that from there. As a general rule of thumb, we've been telling faculty to take their first lesson to get oriented, whether that is a day, a week, 2 weeks. But again, those are just general rules of thumb. You'll have to play that by ear to know how that works with you. But, and I also think it's appropriate to point students to resources for how to use Zoom as well. Or whatever it may be, a lot of the technologies that you may be putting into place, we see one here about Pear Deck and what other tools you might be using. I've noticed that I've been given or been getting a lot of emails from these particular tools that we use, that they have upped their resources for student use. So it's also really appropriate to point students to some extra resources from your school, this tool, whatever it may be that you're using. But I just love the idea of embedding a practice or embedding the practice with something that you're doing in your course, because then you're getting further along in the way.
Yes. And one thing you could do is offer some office hours before your class meeting. So you could say, if you want to practice using Zoom before our first class session, come follow this link and join in at this time. That could give you some options for just meeting with them more individually and giving them some practice before that first class starts. We're at a good place now to open it up for a variety of questions. And one question we have here we'll start out with is Regina said, and you're not out of line at all, Regina, this is a great question. In real life, we have skills to re-engage students when we see them bored. What do we do online? How do we ensure active participation? So that's part of your planning of your sessions too. Think about those moments that you can turn it back to the students to ask them a question, and set the stage early for expecting them to respond to you. So you can use the chat box and, very at the very beginning of the session, say, okay, everyone in the chat box, write one thing that you took away from the reading, or what's one question that you have for us coming into class today, and get them starting to engage pretty early on in the course about the chat box and the responsiveness, and let them know that you're going to be asking them some questions and calling on them. So a clear technique that we use in the classroom is calling on students. So don't be afraid to do that in a synchronous session online, and just ask for their opinion, call them out on it. And the other thing is to really think about chunks of content too, and not getting too long. We are at 1 hour and 8 minutes right now, which is pretty long for a face-to-face synchronous session without a lot of interaction. So if you can think about 10 or 15 minutes, and then an activity where you get them more engaged, and then back to some talking, and then back to an activity. Try to change up that rhythm of the course. Also, there was a question
Julie, I'm
about
sorry.
using, yes,
let me
go ahead.
answer that question about engagement asynchronously. So
Okay.
let's say you're not using Zoom and you want to foster active engagement in a discussion forum, or other ways that they're watching a video, responding, or having that active participation asynchronously. The biggest suggestion I can give you is to make it a part of the directions. And so anytime I'm working with a faculty member that wants to use forums or a discussion tool, I encourage to have you to have it as part of your assessment, that the post to your original prompt needs to answer the question, advance the discussion, and then this is the most important suggestion I can give you. When students are going to respond to another student, do not allow them to, in other words, take points off for responses that are just, great, thank you, nice argument, okay? That's good, they can be collegial, but it needs to advance. Julie, your response was really good, and here's why. You brought out this element of the argument, and I really agree with that, but you also said this, and I disagree with that. See, that's a little bit beyond great post, good job, thanks for posting. And so include that in your assessment of advancing, and that is using a structured, transparent framework to encourage and assess active participation.
Yeah, that's a great tip for the type of feedback we give students, and how we can really help support that engagement. It's hard to ensure it, but we can do some things to support it. Another question is about using Pear Deck without the students having to move from Zoom to the Pear Deck window. You can certainly use Pear Deck in an online environment. You would begin by sharing your slides with the students and giving them that join code. It is a little tricky in terms of them needing to have the Zoom window open and have a browser window open. So they would need to be able to do those side by side, or go back and forth between the two. Another way would be to have them join the Pear Deck session, which, for those of you who haven't used Pear Deck, it's an audience response system that overlays on top of Google Slides. So you can embed questions in Google Slides and get the students to respond, and then show the responses. So if they had two devices operational, you could have them with Zoom and your slides on the main screen, and then they could respond on their phone, and it adapts very well to phones and tablets. Or maybe you could have them open it in two side-by-side windows with Zoom on one side and Pear Deck on the other. It is a little complicated, so I would just have them practice that again in a very low-stakes, non-graded kind of situation. For premium Pear Deck users, there is also a self-paced student mode where you can have a session open for a longer period of time and the students go in and work through the materials at their own pace. And that's an interesting way to use it as well. Nicholas noted that we only used a few slides for the whole session today. Is that a guideline? I think it is helpful to consider making your visuals match with your student learning outcomes. And you see that we tried to link everything we did today back to those learning goals that we shared with you at the beginning. So of course it can depend on your content. Sometimes I have a lot of images, anatomical images that I'm showing students, and so I might have many slides to show them in one session. Other times, less slides. You see that we tried to use a lot of visuals without as much text. That's certainly a good practice to use. And many of the principles that you would apply in a face-to-face presentation would carry over to a synchronous session in terms of the materials that you are providing them. Let's see, in the first online session, what icebreaker would you recommend? Oh, that's a great question. Does anyone have ideas that they would like to share as a good idea for an icebreaker? This can help build that social presence. Any icebreaker ideas?
I would like to share one. Do you listen to me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thanks, Karen.
I will suggest we can ask our students what's something positive they are learning from this experience. So everyone can get in this positive mood. For me, for example, I wanted to address, and I am happy that I have this opportunity, that I think this is a kick to the future for us. I've been learning about e-learning in this week more than I have ever learned. So I am trying to be present in every conference, and I think it's great. Our jobs will be improved in 1,000%, I guess. So I'm very grateful, and this is something good that this all thing that can be seen as bad brought to me.
That is a great suggestion. Do you see how I had to wait a little bit longer than I usually would for someone to speak up? And we do have a very large group today, so that certainly can make a difference. But you do have to give it just another minute to hear from folks. Any other ideas for an icebreaker?
Nicholas has one. Nicholas.
Okay.
Do I turn on my audio? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, now you know why I didn't put on my video before. Look at my hair.
So what's your idea?
That's my icebreaker, my hair.
Okay.
I usually come in I'm usually in a suit and tie for my students, but
you know what? And this is the funny thing that's floating around all sorts of social media posts and boards about we're all going to get to see each other's cats and dogs and home offices and more relaxed.
I sit like this. I sit like this when I'm listening, and then I go like this.
Yes. Here in the States, Al Roker, he's a famous weatherman on the Today Show. He is isolated at home, and he did the weather from his house, and they were picking on him saying, "Do you have pants on?" And he said, "Of course I do," but he had on workout pants instead of his suit pants. So yes, you can give an inspiring question, a silly question. You can do a lot of icebreakers that you might do in a normal first day of class situation. Use your creativity with that. One that I do sometimes is 2 truths and a lie, and you could do that in the chat box where they have to write in 3 things, and 2 of those things are true about them. 1 is not true, and everyone has to figure out which one is the lie, which one is not true. Um, so maybe have them share their social distancing experience is an idea.
You know, I think that humor and personality is important right now. These are trying, anxiety-ridden times. So I love these ideas that are lightening the mood and helping our students and us getting through it. It's a really important thing. Humor is a good instructional tool, and just in general, having good humor and that sort of thing. I would submit extra things that you can do to communicate that through the lens of distance learning or e-learning is really important, you know? So now, Nicholas, I feel like I know you better because I've seen your hair, you know, like now we know
That's
you
right.
better and where you're coming from. And so those things are really helpful, I think.
Yes, we have some good social presence going on now, for sure. Yeah, so selfies about how I got up today, show your pets, social distancing experience, how you feel today. There was also a suggestion from Carmen that there are icebreaker ideas on the Formación Continua site. There's a link to those in the chat. So some are compiled ideas already there for you. So let's see if there are some other questions here in chat. There were some questions about recording over slides or doing voice over recordings, and VoiceThread is one that was mentioned. Powtoon is another one. Let's see.
Here's a question. Here's one that just came in, that courses are 2 hours and 40 minutes with a 15-minute recess break. What is the suggestion on ways to do that? So I have seen this done both ways, where you have a Zoom session for 2 hours and 40 minutes and actually take a break and come back. I think that this is going to be hard for us to say that's the hard and fast best way to do it. I do think that giving breaks is good. So if you do find that you are going to try to do a 2 hour or 2.5 hour, and we do have instructors on our campus that do longer Zoom sessions, and we always recommend give a break. I think the break is important. And so I would say for me, I would probably boil it down to a shorter Zoom session and try to think about ways that you can get into the 1.5 hour area. But I also will capitulate and say sometimes you need to go longer. And if and when you do, 2 things. Communicate so that the students know that we may be on a Zoom session for up to 2 hours. I think the communication part is there. And then build in breaks. And breaks can come in many forms. Actual turn your webcam off, or we're stepping away. You could also do some sort of individual activity that turns into a break. So again, you'll have to see what that works, but as a general suggestion, I would say the 1.5 to 45-minute place is pretty good, but I also will again capitulate that sometimes you may have to go longer, and that's okay. And it's okay if you do. It's just structuring what you're doing. Also remember, if you're asking students to watch the video afterwards, that as long as you go, that's as long as they're watching as well.
Yeah, so an example to reiterate that a little bit would be that in a long session like that, you might talk for a little bit and then give them a task to do. Yeah. So maybe they respond to a written prompt and turn that in and do a discussion. So I would try to go back and forth between, sharing a little bit and getting them actively involved in the learning. So through discussions and other active learning tools, not trying to lecture or talk for 2 hours and 40 minutes, which is what we want to stay away from in any context. So just apply those same strategies to the online face-to-face session. So a couple of other questions are popping up. When students are working on a project or a worksheet where questions might come up, as they do in class, should we conduct a Zoom session for that as well? I'm thinking like a lab kind of situation. So great question there. So what do we do when questions come up? David, I know you have some tricks for this that you share with faculty.
So, yeah, so basically, if I'm understanding what you're saying here, is a lab where they're working through a project and you want to make yourself available to answer questions or be the resource. I think you have, okay, good. So I am good. So I think that it's a great idea. Let me tell you what we're doing in-house this week. So we actually have some graduate assistants that work in our office. And they were encouraged as part of the student community to stay away, although they're still working for us. I set up a virtual lab, a separate Zoom link that when they're working together or working for our center, they joined the virtual lab. And I've been popping in and out of it the last 2 days to see if they're there, to ask questions, assign work. But it's, again, I called it the virtual lab. So I think that is something that you could modify to answer your question. The trick will be that you're going to have to tell them, I'm going to be available for 30 minutes at this time using this link. They may jump into that and you may not be there. So the same thing is true for virtual office hours. It's a great idea as a resource to make yourself available, but I know if you're like me, you don't want to make yourself available for 14 hours, right? So it's structured, specified times. I would also maybe encourage the use of a Google form or a discussion forum where students can, if they're working on something outside of your hours of availability, a structured way to ask questions that you can answer that is more asynchronous, but still delivered efficiently. So I would suggest those two methods would be pretty good. The lab question is one that all of us that work in e-learning are being asked to answer. Clinic-based, lab-based. First of all, I answer it, say there are no replacements for a lab or a clinic. Okay, like we know that, like good hands-on learning, but using the tools and the structures, the best ways to replicate the learning that happens there. I sound like a broken record on that, I'm sure, but that's going to be the best suggestion for sure.
Yes, and I know we are running out of time, so if you need to leave the call, then feel free to do that. But I will stay around and answer one more question from Carmen about some application activities that you can do online. And we have a few more minutes on our end that we can stick around for questions and answers. But I do want to be respectful of your time, so if you need to go, feel free to do that. Carmen asked about application activities that you can do online, and you can do many different types of application activities. Of course, I'm partial to the type of application activities we do in team-based learning, where we give the students a specific problem that all the students are working on the same problem, and it's a significant problem, so it has some kind of connection to real life situations or what they would do in their profession. It narrows down to a specific choice, and then they report it back simultaneously, and we can use those same types of application questions online. So evaluate this situation and determine the best solution. We can think about many different disciplines. For example, with business, we could ask questions like, where is the best location for this type of business given a complete market analysis, and the students work through that process and then make a specific choice. We could have them do some of that individually and then come together in small groups online to come to a clear answer choice. And then we want to get them talking across the teams as well to share those answer choices. So we can certainly go back and forth between the whole group being together to getting them to work in groups and then coming back together as a class. And we can do that in real time through synchronous sessions, or we can do that asynchronously by posing a question, giving them some time to do back and forth discussion within a small group, and then revealing their answers to each other, and then discussion across the teams. So you can set up those same types of activities that you would do in a face-to-face classroom and let them do those in an online environment as well. So yes, breakout classes are good tools for doing that type of work. Absolutely. Yes. Any other final questions as we wrap up our time together today? It's been so good to see familiar faces and names, and we are all in this strange time together, learning many lessons along the way.
Julie,
And
there was
yes,
one
go ahead, David.
question. There was one question and one tip that I'll give about the audio feedback. We're both connected via our computer audio. You are correct. I forget now. I'm trying to scroll to find it. When phone audio, when students or participants log in with the phone audio, it does tend to feedback more. But I also understand that sometimes students will have to call in. If they have a device, have them download the Zoom app. It works better than calling in. But that is correct. You'll notice that well, first of all, Julie and I are in separate rooms as well. So that's another reason why the feedback wasn't as bad. But yeah, so that's another reason to also orient students in practice. And then again, my final, and maybe I should have included this earlier, but if you're worried about what I'm going to do a screen share. If you're worried about what students have in practicing Zoom, this is Zoom's homepage. Over here in the top right corner where it says resource, and the first thing that it says download Zoom client, you can have students do this before even coming to your class, and this will prep their device for the appropriate Zoom download so that when they click to join your meeting, they've already downloaded the app on their device, and it'll jump right to their meeting. If they have not done that, they'll have to go through that download step. Now it's seamless and it's pretty quick, but this is an easy thing that you can have them do ahead of time. And it's a great suggestion. I was with a group of faculty yesterday and we included this, and they all got on their computers and started emailing their students to have that. So right now we're all wondering, like, what's something we can do? Here's an easy one. Send them to zoom.us, download that, and it's at least the one thing that we can add to our communication plan. Thank you all so much for inviting me to come. I've heard wonderful things about you all from Julie over the years that she's been able to come down there. So I'm so honored and glad that I was invited. Thanks, Carmen, and of course, Julie, for inviting me to come.
Yes, and I'll just say that we are learning every day, and things are changing every day in terms of, as we answer questions, we're learning new things and figuring out new ways to do this work, because it is a little bit different than starting a course online from the beginning. So we will continue to share information and be here for you if you have questions, and we wish you all the very best in this new adventure that we're all in together.
Bye. Thank you everyone for joining.
Bye.